You're about to meet your soulmate, and the surprise will leave you speechless. There are moments in life when something feels close before it actually arrives. Not in a dramatic way. Not with loud signs or obvious warnings. But with a quiet pressure in your chest, a sense that something is shifting just beyond what you can see. If you're feeling that right now, it's not imagination. It's preparation. Meeting your soulmate doesn't happen the way movies teach us to expect. There is no sudden lightning bolt that announces everything is about to change. Instead, it happens after a long stretch of silence, healing, disappointment, and emotional exhaustion. It happens when you've stopped chasing, stopped waiting, and stopped trying to prove your worth to anyone. That's why the surprise will leave you speechless. Not because it's dramatic, but because it arrives when you finally feel grounded enough not to need it. You may think you're just living your life right now. Getting through days. Managing responsibilities. Trying to stay emotionally balanced after everything you've been through. But beneath the surface, something deeper is happening. Your standards have shifted. Your tolerance for confusion has disappeared. Your heart has learned the difference between intensity and intimacy. That learning didn't come easily. You didn't wake up one day suddenly wise. You earned this clarity through disappointment. Through connections that felt close but never fully arrived. Through loving people who couldn't meet you emotionally. Through waiting in spaces that slowly drained you. And because of that, you are no longer the version of yourself who would have missed this moment. That's the first surprise. Your soulmate isn't arriving to save you. They're arriving to meet you where you already stand. For a long time, you may have believed that meeting your soulmate would feel overwhelming. That it would knock the air out of your lungs. That it would feel urgent, intoxicating, almost chaotic. But the truth is much quieter. When you meet them, the loudest thing will be the calm. You won't feel the need to perform. You won't feel the need to impress. You won't feel the need to question yourself. There will be an immediate sense of ease that feels unfamiliar if you're used to emotional turbulence. And that ease may confuse you at first. You might wonder if something is missing. If the spark is strong enough. If it's too simple to be real. But simplicity is not emptiness. Simplicity is safety. This is where many people misunderstand destiny. They expect fate to feel dramatic because pain has always been dramatic. But love that is aligned doesn't need to announce itself loudly. It settles in. It feels natural. It feels like recognition instead of pursuit. You may not even realize it's happening at first. It might begin as an ordinary interaction. A conversation that lingers longer than expected. A moment of connection that doesn't demand anything from you, but stays with you afterward. You won't walk away replaying every word, trying to decode meaning. You'll walk away feeling strangely steady. And that steadiness will follow you. You'll notice that your nervous system doesn't go into alert mode around them. You're not scanning for mixed signals. You're not wondering where you stand. You're not anticipating disappointment. Your body relaxes in their presence before your mind understands why. That's not coincidence. That's compatibility at a level deeper than attraction. The surprise is also that they may not look the way you imagined. They may not fit the image you once held on to. They may not arrive with fireworks or grand gestures. They may arrive quietly, confidently, grounded in who they are. And something in you will recognize that immediately. Not as excitement that overwhelms you, but as familiarity that steadies you. You might feel like you've known them longer than you have. Like conversations skip the surface naturally. Like silence doesn't feel awkward. Like you don't have to explain your depth because they already sense it. That kind of connection doesn't shout. It resonates. Another surprise is how little effort it takes to be yourself. You won't feel like you have to manage their emotions. You won't feel like you have to shrink to keep peace. You won't feel like you're asking for too much just by being honest. Your emotional needs won't feel heavy in this connection. They'll feel normal. And that may be the most shocking part of all. Because when you're used to emotional scarcity, mutual presence feels almost unreal. You may also notice that the timing feels strangely right, even if life itself is still complicated. You don't need everything to be perfect for this connection to feel grounded. There's a sense that even if challenges exist, they can be faced together instead of alone. That's something you haven't felt before. In past connections, difficulty pulled you apart. Here, it feels navigable. Not because either of you is flawless, but because there is emotional availability on both sides. You're not carrying the connection by yourself anymore. Another part of the surprise is how quickly your old patterns lose their grip. You don't feel the urge to test them. You don't feel the need to pull away to see if they'll chase. You don't feel compelled to overgive to secure their interest. Those instincts simply don't activate. Because you don't feel threatened. This is where you realize that the right connection doesn't require strategies. It doesn't require emotional labor to keep alive. It grows because both people are present, not because one person is trying harder. You may catch yourself thinking, "This feels different." Not in a dramatic sense, but in a grounded one. Different because it doesn't drain you. Different because it doesn't consume your thoughts. Different because it fits into your life instead of disrupting it. That's how you'll know it's real. The surprise is also internal. You'll notice how much you've changed. How you no longer tolerate uncertainty. How you speak more clearly. How you listen to your intuition without arguing with it. How you no longer chase what feels off. Meeting your soulmate doesn't just reveal them. It reveals you. You'll see yourself responding with confidence instead of anxiety. With curiosity instead of fear. With openness instead of over-attachment. You'll realize that all the work you did on yourself wasn't preparation for loneliness. It was preparation for alignment. There may still be moments of doubt. Healing doesn't erase humanity. You may wonder if it's too calm. Too steady. Too easy. But then you'll notice something important. Even when doubt appears, it doesn't control you. You don't spiral. You don't self-abandon. You stay present. That presence allows the connection to unfold naturally, without pressure. You don't rush into promises. You don't force labels. You allow time to do what it does best, reveal truth. And the truth will reveal itself gently. Through consistency. Through effort that feels mutual. Through emotional safety that grows instead of fluctuates. This is not a love that leaves you guessing. It's a love that shows you where you stand without you having to ask. The biggest surprise of all may be how unafraid you feel. Not fearless, but calm. You're no longer trying to protect yourself by controlling outcomes. You trust yourself enough to know that even if things evolve slowly, you won't lose yourself. That trust changes everything. You're not waiting to be completed. You're not hoping to be chosen. You're sharing your life from a place of wholeness. And when two people meet from that place, love doesn't explode. It settles. This meeting doesn't mark the end of your journey. It marks the beginning of a new way of loving. One that doesn't require you to disappear. One that doesn't leave you empty. One that doesn't ask you to endure confusion. The surprise isn't that you meet your soulmate. The surprise is how natural it feels when you do. And when you look back one day, you'll understand something clearly. Everything that didn't work before was clearing space for this moment. You weren't delayed. You were being prepared. And now, you're about to step into a connection that doesn't leave you speechless because it overwhelms you. But because, for the first time, your heart finally feels understood. After that first sense of recognition settles, something subtle but important begins to happen. The connection doesn't rush forward. It doesn't explode into declarations or instant certainty. Instead, it unfolds in a way that almost feels unfamiliar if you've spent your life associating love with urgency. This is where the second surprise lives. You realize you're not anxious. You're not checking your phone compulsively. You're not replaying every interaction to search for hidden meaning. You're not wondering where you stand or how to secure their interest. And that absence of anxiety feels strange at first. Almost suspicious. You may even catch yourself thinking, "Why don't I feel more nervous?" or "Why am I not overthinking this?" The answer is simple, even if it takes time to accept. Your body recognizes safety before your mind does. In past connections, your nervous system was constantly alert. You were scanning for shifts in tone, delays in replies, subtle changes in energy. You learned to stay vigilant because love felt unpredictable. Even moments of closeness carried an undercurrent of fear. How long will this last? With your soulmate, that vigilance fades. Not because you stopped caring, but because you don't need to protect yourself in the same way. Their presence doesn't feel conditional. Their attention doesn't feel fragile. You sense, intuitively, that you don't have to earn your place with them. And that changes how you show up. You speak more honestly without rehearsing. You share thoughts without editing them to be more acceptable. You allow pauses in conversation without rushing to fill them. There's room to breathe here. Another surprise is how ordinary the moments feel, and how meaningful they become afterward. There may not be dramatic first encounters or cinematic scenes. Instead, it's the way they listen when you talk about something small. The way they remember details without trying. The way they look at you when you're not performing or impressing, just existing. Those moments linger. Not because they're intense, but because they're real. You start noticing that time feels different around them. Conversations stretch without effort. Silences don't feel empty. You're not rushing toward the next moment, because the current one feels complete. That's not boredom. That's presence. You may also notice something else that surprises you. your past hurts don't dominate your reactions anymore. They still exist. You're still human. But they don't control how you interpret this connection. You're not assuming abandonment at the first sign of space. You're not bracing for disappointment when things are calm. Instead, you respond to what's happening now. That's a sign of healing you may not have realized you achieved. Your soulmate doesn't trigger your wounds. They don't activate the part of you that learned to survive love by staying guarded or hyper-aware. Instead, they invite the part of you that feels safe enough to be open without fear. And openness here doesn't feel risky. It feels natural. The surprise deepens as you realize how little effort it takes to maintain the connection. You're not the only one initiating. You're not carrying the emotional weight alone. Interest flows both ways without negotiation. When something matters to you, they don't minimize it. When you express a boundary, they don't challenge it. When you need space, they don't punish you for it. That kind of mutual respect may feel unfamiliar if you're used to defending your needs. At some point, you may catch yourself waiting for the other shoe to drop. For the moment where things suddenly become complicated or distant. That expectation doesn't come from this connection. It comes from your history. And when it doesn't happen, when consistency remains, something inside you softens. You begin to trust. Not blindly. Not recklessly. But calmly. Trust doesn't feel like a leap here. It feels like a gradual settling. You also start to see how different conflict feels. Disagreements don't turn into power struggles. They don't threaten the bond. They're approached with curiosity instead of defensiveness. You're both trying to understand, not win. That's another quiet shock. You're not afraid to speak up, because you don't fear losing the connection by being honest. You're not walking on eggshells. You're walking alongside someone who wants to know you, not manage you. The more time you spend together, the more you notice how grounded you feel afterward. You don't leave interactions drained. You don't feel emotionally depleted. If anything, you feel clearer. More yourself. That's how you know this isn't attachment masquerading as love. Attachment clings and exhausts. Love steadies and restores. Your soulmate's presence doesn't hijack your life. It integrates into it. They don't replace your world. They add to it. You still care about your work, your friendships, your inner life. You're not abandoning yourself to maintain the connection. And that balance is something you've never had before. Another surprise comes when you realize how little you need reassurance. You're not asking, "Do you like me?" or "Where is this going?" all the time. Not because you're indifferent, but because their behavior answers those questions without words. Consistency is reassuring in a way declarations never are. You don't need to decode meaning. You don't need to search for signs. What you see is what you get, and what you get feels enough. That enoughness may feel unfamiliar if you're used to longing. Longing creates drama. Enough creates peace. You may also notice how your intuition feels different now. It's not screaming. It's not warning. It's quiet and clear. You don't feel pulled in conflicting directions. You're not trying to convince yourself of anything. Your intuition isn't fighting your emotions anymore. They're aligned. This is where the biggest internal surprise happens. You realize that love doesn't have to hurt to be meaningful. It doesn't have to destabilize you to feel deep. It doesn't have to cost you your sense of self. You may grieve that realization a little. Grieve the years you spent thinking chaos was passion. Grieve the times you mistook anxiety for connection. Grieve the version of you who believed love had to be earned through endurance. But that grief passes quickly, because what you're experiencing now is proof that something different is possible. You also start to see how your soulmate mirrors you in unexpected ways. Not necessarily in personality or preferences, but in values. In emotional availability. In how they handle discomfort. In their willingness to show up even when things aren't easy. You don't feel like you're teaching them how to love. They already know. That realization brings relief you didn't know you were carrying tension around. Relief from explaining yourself. Relief from waiting for growth. Relief from hoping potential will become reality. With them, reality is already present. As the connection deepens, you may notice that it doesn't consume your identity. You're not defining yourself by the relationship. You're sharing your life, not giving it away. And because of that, the bond grows stronger instead of heavier. This is love that doesn't require self-sacrifice. It requires presence. Another subtle but powerful surprise is how patient you feel. Not patient in a strained way, but patient because there's no urgency. You don't feel like you have to rush milestones to secure the connection. You trust that time is working with you, not against you. You're not racing toward an outcome. You're experiencing the process. And that process feels steady. You may also realize that your soulmate sees you more clearly than anyone else has before. Not just the parts you show intentionally, but the quieter parts. The moods you don't explain. The shifts in your energy. They notice without interrogating. They care without controlling. Being seen like that can feel vulnerable at first. But it doesn't feel dangerous. It feels respectful. You don't feel exposed. You feel acknowledged. As weeks or months pass, you begin to understand why the timing mattered. Why you couldn't have met them earlier. Why this connection wouldn't have worked with the version of you that was still chasing validation or tolerating confusion. You needed to become this grounded first. And they needed to become who they are now too. The surprise isn't just that you meet your soulmate. It's that you meet them when you're finally capable of receiving love without fear. You don't cling. You don't test. You don't self-sabotage. You stay present. And presence allows love to grow naturally, without force. There may still be moments of uncertainty. No connection is perfect. But uncertainty here doesn't feel threatening. It feels manageable. You don't catastrophize. You don't spiral. You talk. You listen. You adjust. Together. This is where you realize something important. The work you did on yourself wasn't about becoming invulnerable. It was about becoming available in a healthy way. Available to love without losing yourself. Available to be chosen without shrinking. Available to choose someone who chooses you back. That availability changes everything. You're not holding your breath anymore. You're breathing inside the connection. And that's the clearest sign you're exactly where you're meant to be. In the next part, we'll move into how this connection continues to unfold, how it challenges you in new but healthy ways, and why the biggest surprise is not who your soulmate is, but who you become while loving them. As this connection continues to unfold, the third surprise reveals itself slowly, almost quietly, the way truth usually does when it's meant to last. You begin to realize that meeting your soulmate doesn't mean life suddenly becomes easy. It means life becomes honest. And honesty has a way of reshaping everything you thought you knew about love, yourself, and the future you're building. What changes now is not the intensity, but the depth. You start noticing that this relationship invites you to grow without making you feel inadequate. Growth here doesn't come from fear of losing them. It comes from a natural desire to be present, to be accountable, to be real. You don't feel pressured to evolve to keep their interest. You feel inspired to evolve because the connection feels worth showing up for fully. That distinction matters more than you realize. In the past, growth may have felt like survival. You adjusted your behavior, your tone, your needs to fit someone else's comfort. You learned how to be smaller, quieter, more patient than you should have been. With your soulmate, growth feels mutual. It's not one person stretching while the other stays still. It's two people becoming more aware together. You begin to see how conflict shows up differently now. Disagreements don't feel like threats to the bond. They feel like moments of understanding waiting to happen. There is space to pause, to reflect, to respond instead of react. You're not afraid to be misunderstood temporarily, because you trust that understanding will come. That trust doesn't come from blind faith. It comes from consistency. Your soulmate doesn't disappear when things get uncomfortable. They don't shut down emotionally to avoid hard conversations. They don't make you feel like expressing your truth is dangerous. And because of that, you don't armor yourself the way you used to. You stay open. And openness here doesn't feel like exposure. It feels like collaboration. Another surprise is how your sense of self continues to strengthen, not dissolve, within the relationship. You don't lose your individuality. You don't feel consumed. In fact, you feel more yourself than you ever have. Your interests, your goals, your inner world are not only respected, they're encouraged. You're not asked to merge identities. You're invited to stand side by side. This is where you realize that love doesn't have to be all-consuming to be meaningful. It doesn't have to dominate your thoughts or rearrange your entire life. It can coexist with who you already are, enhancing rather than replacing your sense of purpose. You may notice that you feel calmer making decisions now. You're not constantly questioning whether you're doing the right thing. You trust your judgment more. And when you do feel uncertain, you don't spiral into self-doubt. You talk it through. You reflect. You choose with clarity. This relationship doesn't confuse your intuition. It supports it. Another layer of surprise appears when you look back at your past and realize how much of your pain was rooted in trying to be chosen. Trying to be enough. Trying to secure love through effort instead of alignment. That pattern feels distant now, almost unrecognizable. Not because you're hardened, but because you're healed. You no longer feel the need to prove your worth through sacrifice. You don't overextend to earn affection. You don't tolerate emotional inconsistency just to avoid being alone. The version of you that once did those things isn't gone. It's been understood, forgiven, and released. That release creates space. Space for laughter that isn't tinged with anxiety. Space for affection that isn't followed by doubt. Space for silence that doesn't feel like abandonment. You also start to notice how your soulmate mirrors your emotional maturity back to you. When you're honest, they're receptive. When you're vulnerable, they're steady. When you need reassurance, it's offered without making you feel needy. That reciprocity is deeply regulating. It teaches your nervous system that love doesn't have to be unpredictable to be alive. You may also feel a new kind of courage emerging. Not the loud, dramatic kind, but a quiet confidence in your ability to face challenges without losing yourself. You're not afraid of the future anymore, because you're not facing it alone emotionally. That doesn't mean you depend on them. It means you trust the partnership. Another important shift happens in how you view commitment. Commitment no longer feels like a loss of freedom. It feels like a choice you make willingly, without fear or pressure. You don't feel trapped by the idea of building something long-term. You feel grounded by it. Because commitment here isn't about obligation. It's about alignment. You may also notice how this love doesn't isolate you from the rest of your life. Your friendships don't fade. Your passions don't shrink. Your sense of self doesn't narrow. Instead, everything feels more integrated. You're not splitting yourself into compartments anymore. You're whole. And wholeness attracts wholeness. As time passes, you may experience moments where old fears try to resurface. A sudden worry. A fleeting doubt. A reflex to protect yourself. But those moments don't take over. You recognize them for what they are, echoes, not realities. You don't let them dictate your actions. You stay present. That presence allows the relationship to deepen organically. You don't rush milestones. You don't measure progress against external timelines. You let the connection evolve at its own pace, trusting that what's real doesn't need to be forced. This patience doesn't feel passive. It feels grounded. You're no longer afraid that taking things slowly means losing momentum. You understand now that depth requires time. That trust builds through consistency, not intensity. That love matures through shared experiences, not dramatic declarations. Another surprise reveals itself in how you handle vulnerability. You don't feel the need to overshare to create closeness. You don't rush intimacy to secure connection. You allow vulnerability to unfold naturally, layer by layer, in moments that feel safe and mutual. And because of that, intimacy here feels deep, not rushed. You feel seen without feeling exposed. You also notice how this relationship changes your relationship with the future. You don't fantasize as much. Not because you lack imagination, but because you're grounded in reality. You're not living in hypothetical scenarios. You're living in what's actually happening. And what's happening feels enough. That's a profound shift. In the past, you may have lived more in your head than in your life. Imagining what could be. Hoping things would change. Waiting for signs. Now, you're present. Engaged. Participating. You're not waiting for love to arrive. You're experiencing it. Another subtle but powerful change is how you handle uncertainty together. Life doesn't stop being unpredictable. Challenges still arise. But uncertainty doesn't feel isolating anymore. You face it as a team, even when you don't have all the answers. That shared resilience builds trust in a way nothing else can. You also begin to understand that meeting your soulmate doesn't complete you. It complements you. You're still responsible for your own happiness, your own growth, your own healing. But you're no longer doing that work in isolation. You're supported without being carried, loved without being managed. That balance is rare. And it's the result of everything you've been through. You may feel a quiet gratitude for the timing now. For the delays. For the heartbreaks that redirected you. For the lessons that shaped you into someone capable of recognizing this kind of love when it arrived. You weren't late. You were becoming. This third phase of the connection is not about excitement or anticipation. It's about integration. About weaving love into the fabric of your life instead of placing it on a pedestal. About allowing the relationship to support your growth rather than define it. And in doing so, you discover something unexpected. Loving your soulmate doesn't make you lose yourself. It brings you home to who you've always been. You feel more grounded in your values. More confident in your choices. More secure in your sense of self. Love here doesn't distract you from your purpose. It aligns with it. That alignment creates a sense of peace that is difficult to put into words. It's not the absence of problems. It's the presence of trust. Trust in yourself. Trust in them. Trust in what you're building together. And that trust allows love to deepen without fear. As this chapter continues, you may realize that the biggest surprise isn't the meeting itself. It's the way love feels sustainable. Not fleeting. Not exhausting. Not overwhelming. But steady. In the next part, we'll explore how this connection continues to evolve over time, how commitment begins to take shape naturally, and why the deepest surprise is not the love you receive, but the life you create together while staying fully yourself. As the connection continues to deepen, the fourth surprise begins to reveal itself in a way you never anticipated. It isn't about romance intensifying or emotions becoming louder. It's about stability becoming sacred. You start to realize that the most extraordinary thing about meeting your soulmate is not how they make you feel in moments of closeness, but how they remain present across time. This is where love stops feeling like a moment and starts feeling like a place. You notice it in small, almost invisible ways. In how disagreements don't linger like storms. In how misunderstandings don't turn into emotional distance. In how neither of you feels the need to withdraw to regain control. Instead, there is a quiet commitment to staying connected, even when things feel imperfect. That commitment feels different from anything you've known before. In the past, commitment may have felt like pressure. Like something you had to earn or protect. With your soulmate, commitment feels like a shared decision that doesn't need to be defended. It exists without tension. It doesn't trap you. It steadies you. You begin to understand that real love is not built on constant reassurance. It's built on reliability. On showing up again and again in ordinary moments. On choosing consistency over intensity. And that choice becomes deeply comforting. You may notice that your nervous system continues to relax over time. You sleep better. You feel less emotionally on edge. Your moods are no longer tied to someone else's availability. You don't brace yourself for abandonment after moments of closeness. You trust that connection doesn't disappear overnight. That trust allows you to fully inhabit your life. You're not distracted by fear. You're not managing expectations constantly. You're not preparing for loss. You're living. Another profound shift happens in how you communicate. Conversations no longer feel performative. You're not trying to sound a certain way or say the right thing to maintain connection. You speak naturally. You listen openly. Silence feels comfortable instead of awkward. You don't rush to fill gaps. You allow space. That space becomes fertile ground for deeper understanding. You learn how the other person processes emotions. How they handle stress. What makes them feel safe. And they learn the same about you. This knowledge doesn't make you cautious. It makes you considerate. Consideration replaces anxiety. You may also notice how conflict transforms into collaboration. When something feels off, it's addressed without blame. You're not trying to win. You're trying to understand. You don't assume the worst. You assume good intent, even when emotions run high. This doesn't mean disagreements disappear. It means they don't threaten the bond. That realization is quietly powerful. In previous relationships, conflict may have felt like proof that love was fragile. Here, conflict feels like proof that love is strong enough to handle reality. You don't fear honesty. You don't suppress concerns to keep peace. You trust that truth strengthens connection instead of destroying it. Another surprise emerges in how you experience vulnerability. You no longer feel exposed when you open up. You feel supported. You don't worry that your honesty will be used against you later. You don't brace for emotional withdrawal after moments of closeness. You are met, not managed. That safety allows you to share parts of yourself you didn't even realize you were protecting. Old fears. Quiet hopes. Unspoken dreams. You don't rush this sharing. It unfolds naturally, over time, as trust builds layer by layer. And because it's mutual, it feels balanced. You're not carrying the emotional depth alone anymore. You may also begin to notice how this love influences other areas of your life. You take more risks professionally. You set healthier boundaries with others. You trust your decisions more. Love here doesn't consume your energy. It supports it. You feel more capable, not dependent. That's a significant shift. You realize that being loved well doesn't make you weaker. It makes you braver. You're not afraid to pursue what matters to you because you're not constantly managing emotional instability. You're grounded enough to move forward with confidence. Another layer of surprise appears when you think about the future. Not in a fantasized way, but in a practical one. You don't feel pressure to define everything immediately. You don't need to map out every step. You trust that whatever you build together will be shaped through shared decisions, not rigid plans. You're no longer rushing toward certainty. You're building it. This changes how commitment grows. It doesn't arrive as a dramatic moment. It arrives as a series of small choices. Choosing to show up. Choosing to listen. As this connection continues to mature, the fifth surprise arrives in a way that is almost imperceptible at first. There is no clear moment where you can say, "This is it." Instead, it becomes evident through accumulation. Through days that stack gently on top of one another. Through shared routines, shared decisions, shared silence. You begin to realize that love is no longer something you experience only in emotional peaks. It has woven itself into the structure of your life. This is where love becomes lived. You notice it in how your future starts to include another person without effort. Not in fantasy or dramatic planning, but in practical ways. You think about how decisions affect both of you. You consider their schedule when planning your own. You imagine space not just for yourself, but for us, and it doesn't feel restrictive. It feels natural. That naturalness is the surprise. In the past, imagining a future with someone may have felt heavy. It came with fear, uncertainty, or pressure. You worried about losing yourself. About being trapped. About choosing wrong. Now, those fears don't dominate your thoughts. You feel steady enough to look ahead without panic. That steadiness didn't come from certainty. It came from trust built over time. Trust in how this person shows up. Trust in how you handle challenges together. Trust in your ability to communicate honestly without fear of losing the bond. This trust allows vision to grow organically. You're not forcing alignment. You're discovering it. Another layer of surprise appears in how you handle compromise. Compromise no longer feels like sacrifice. It feels like collaboration. You don't feel like you're giving something up to keep the peace. You feel like you're finding solutions that respect both of you. That balance is deeply reassuring. You realize that in the past, compromise often meant self-abandonment. You adjusted your needs quietly. You accepted less than you deserved to avoid conflict. With your soulmate, compromise feels mutual. Both voices matter. Both perspectives are valued. You don't disappear. You participate. This changes the emotional tone of everything you build together. You may notice how this relationship supports your growth rather than distracting from it. You pursue goals with more confidence. You take emotional risks outside the relationship because you're not expending all your energy managing instability inside it. Love becomes a source of strength, not a drain. That shift is profound. You're not constantly regulating someone else's emotions. You're not anticipating emotional fallout. You're not adjusting your behavior to prevent disconnection. You're free to be present in your own life. Another surprise is how conflict continues to evolve. Disagreements don't escalate into emotional standoffs. They don't turn into silence or withdrawal. They become conversations. Sometimes uncomfortable, sometimes messy, but always grounded in the shared desire to understand rather than control. You trust that resolution is possible. That trust allows you to stay open even when emotions run high. You don't shut down to protect yourself. You don't attack to regain power. You stay engaged. And so do they. This doesn't mean conflict disappears. It means it becomes constructive. You also begin to notice how your emotional resilience deepens. You don't feel destabilized by small misunderstandings. You don't assume the worst. You don't catastrophize. You give the relationship room to breathe, to adjust, to grow. That patience is not passive. It's confident. You know now that real connection can handle imperfection. It doesn't require constant proof. It requires consistency. Another subtle surprise appears in how you experience intimacy. It's no longer driven by urgency or fear of losing closeness. It unfolds with trust. With presence. With a sense of safety that allows vulnerability to deepen naturally. You don't rush emotional or physical intimacy to secure the bond. You allow it to grow because the bond already exists. That creates a depth you've never experienced before. You feel seen without being exposed. You feel desired without being objectified. You feel close without feeling consumed. This balance allows intimacy to feel nourishing instead of overwhelming. You may also notice how your sense of identity remains intact. You're not losing yourself in the relationship. You're not defining yourself solely by your role in it. You're still you, with your own interests, passions, and inner world. And your soulmate doesn't feel threatened by that. They encourage it. They want you to grow, not shrink. They want you fulfilled, not dependent. That mutual support creates a partnership where both people are invested in each other's wholeness. This is where love becomes a shared practice. Not something you fall into and hope survives, but something you nurture intentionally through presence, communication, and respect. Another surprise is how your emotional memory begins to heal. Old triggers lose their power. Situations that once would have caused anxiety now feel manageable. You don't react from old wounds as often. And when you do, you recognize it quickly and address it without shame. You're not perfect. You're aware. That awareness changes how you repair ruptures. Apologies are offered without defensiveness. Accountability doesn't feel like failure. It feels like care. You both understand that repair is part of connection, not proof of its weakness. You may also notice how gratitude becomes more present. Not the performative kind, but a quiet appreciation for the way love shows up daily. For the small gestures. For the consistency. For the effort that doesn't seek praise. This gratitude deepens your commitment. Not out of obligation, but out of recognition. You recognize how rare this kind of connection is. How many people mistake chaos for passion? How many settle for half-presence? How many never experience love that feels both deep and steady? You don't take this lightly. Another important shift happens in how you approach long-term decisions. You're not rushing toward milestones to validate the relationship. You're allowing them to emerge naturally from shared readiness. You don't need to prove the love. You're living it. This patience doesn't feel like delay. It feels like alignment. You trust that what you're building is rooted, not rushed. That foundation matters more to you now than speed. You may also notice how your fears about the future change shape. You're no longer afraid of being abandoned or not chosen. Instead, your fears are practical, navigable, shared. You talk about them. You plan together. You face uncertainty as a team. That shared orientation toward the future builds a sense of security that goes beyond romance. It feels like partnership. You also realize that meeting your soulmate didn't erase your independence. It refined it. You're still capable on your own. You still value your autonomy. But now, you also value interdependence. The ability to rely on someone without losing yourself. That balance is something you once thought was impossible. Now, it's your reality. Another surprise emerges in how you handle change. Life continues to evolve. Circumstances shift. Challenges arise. But change doesn't threaten the bond. It becomes something you adapt to together. You don't fear growth. You welcome it.